your value in the dating marketplace is going down, like further and further and further down over time. The older you get, the more difficult it will be. The older your kids get, the more difficult it will be. And the more people that you sleep with, the more difficult it will be. And so maybe, just maybe you're setting yourself up for failure, not only by potentially ruining a relationship with a person that you work with, potentially ruining a friendship, but also putting yourself in the position where you will probably take a bit of emotional damage, and then your long-term prospects in terms of relationship will also go down. Welcome to Mom Alternative. Our theme of the day is lies women tell themselves. We'll be talking about fertility, friends with benefits, household chores, and anniversaries. Our first one is titled, Does Fertility Rapidly Decline in Early 30s? Just looking for people's experiences in having kids in their 20s and then in their 30s. I've had all my kids in my 20s and had no fertility issues and fell pregnant within 3 months with them all. My last was born just after I turned 30. We are considering trying again when I've been in my current job for 18 months. I'll be 34, almost 35 when we begin to try. My husband will be 35. Have you found it more difficult to conceive as you age? I'd love to try earlier, but the job I currently have and want to keep, I'm going to learn a lot in the first year, then would like to have a bit more experience before I'm hoping to get pregnant. Sorry if this is in the wrong group to post in, but couldn't figure out a better one. So obviously the fundamental question that she asked, actually, I'm quite happy that she decided to ask, because I think it's a pretty fair thing to ask. Although maybe just getting anecdotal evidence from a whole bunch of people on the internet is not actually going to say a lot or give you much to go on when it comes to your individual circumstances and your particular situation when it comes to fertility. So whether it's really very clever that she decided to ask or not, I would always take everything that people say here with a grain of salt, because there's a lot that goes into fertility. And so in general, this is one of those perfect scenarios. I think there was data that came out a couple of, like maybe about a year ago, that suggested that there are more women in their 30s now without kids than there are like who hit 30 years old. There are more women who are 30 years old who do not have kids than there are 30-year-old women with kids. And so we have definitely seen this shift societally where we're having kids later and later, of course, largely also because we have technologies and things that make it easier to have kids when you're like 40, which was not probable for the majority of women, not that easy or not that possible to happen naturally for a long time. And so it's a pretty natural question. I appreciate that she's asking it. I wouldn't take anything that people say here too seriously, but I think that the big thing to keep in mind with fertility is that we do have this image of it, that there's like a specific cutoff point. You know, for example, the general cutoff point that people will throw around is 35, as if there is a change that your body goes through the moment that you hit 35, that suddenly you're not as fertile anymore. When obviously what happens is that fertility starts to gradually decline. Generally speaking, when you hit about 30 years old, for the majority of women, and so for the majority of women, it's going to be the case that you're more fertile in your 20s. And then when you hit your 30s is when it starts going down. By the time you hit 35, it's already maybe half of what it was. And then it goes down even further. And by the time you hit 40, it's maybe like 10% of what it was. And then it continues going down. So it's obviously a transition. We somehow seem to convince ourselves that there's always these straight cutoff points. We do it actually also very similarly with miscarriages. For example, a lot of people say after you're 12 weeks pregnant, then the likelihood of having a miscarriage is very low. And this is, of course, true. But again, it's not that 12 weeks is a line in the sand that you can say, okay, from this point onwards, now it's not going to happen. Biology just doesn't work that way. Biology is all in waves and things change gradually. And so what I find really interesting about this particular case is, yes, fertility does decline. How rapid that is depends on the woman, on the specific individual woman, even who's thinking about having kids slightly later on than she did before. And obviously fertility depends a lot on other factors that are going on in your life as well. So for example, if your health is not in good shape, if your hormones aren't in good shape, then your fertility is going to be a bit dodgy. It's possible that there are some women out there for whom, for example, if their health is in really bad shape during their 20s, and actually their 30s might be better off if they manage to get their health in better shape. So there's always that level of variation. But yes, chances are, especially if you've already had kids, you've had that experience, by the time you hit 30, you're going to find that the experience of pregnancy is a little bit harder for your body to handle, and it may take you longer to get pregnant. And what I find really kind of amusing to me about this situation is the reason that she wants to wait before deciding to have the next baby that she wants. For me, this idea of I want to learn a lot in the first year in this job, and then I want to stay until I have a bit more experience, and then I want to start trying to have a baby. Obviously, it may work out, I would just challenge if that really makes sense for a lot of women. For me personally, I would not be delaying when I want to have kids. If I wanted to have kids in my mid-30s, I wouldn't be delaying it because I want to have a little bit more experience in this job. This idea of I want to keep this job, I'm really attached to it. I just don't think that I would ever choose a job over the potential of being able to have a child. And I could not imagine going through the heartache of, for example, if it takes 6 months to get pregnant or 8 months to get pregnant, for me to feel like, hey, maybe I would have had a much easier time if I had chosen to do it earlier. But obviously, people make their own choices and make their own decisions. So I'm not saying that she can't do that or anything. I would just, for me personally, I would find it a little bit strange. Now, what's really funny about the comments here, you'll see a lot of people, people fall in two buckets. One bucket is all the people who got pregnant really easily in their 30s, and they're like, that's absolutely no problem. Don't worry about it. You can do whatever you want. And that, I think, is a lie that a lot of women tell themselves. And then obviously the other women who did have some struggles. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The first person says, not at all. Fertility does not decline. That is the question that she's asking. She says that with her first baby, she got pregnant on the third try at 33 years old. And then she says, mind you, I had been on birth control for 18 years at that point, got pregnant with twins on the first try at 34, had a miscarriage, then got pregnant first try after mid 34. Now, these are the types of statements that people make. For a lot of people, if you've been on birth control for 18 years, that's actually going to have a serious impact on your fertility. So I'm very glad for her that she managed to just get off birth control and get pregnant straight away. But when people state these things and they state them as if they're fact and they're like, of course it's going to be like this for everyone, it always makes me deeply uncomfortable. And then things like getting pregnant with twins and then having a miscarriage. Missed miscarriages are exceedingly rare. They're extremely, extremely rare as an experience for people to go through. And these are the types of questions that I would always have in terms of what have I done to my system that this type of thing happens? So for women who experience a lot of miscarriages or who have a missed miscarriage or who struggle to get pregnant for a long time, all of these questions come into play. This one says, I spent my 20s trying very hard not to get pregnant, so I have no basis for comparison, but my kids were both conceived our first cycle trying when I was 30 and when I was 34. And that's also hilarious to me because she can't make a comparison. So yes, she managed to conceive straight away, which is also amazing, awesome, super happy for her. But there's always a sense of confidence that people have. I'm always like, don't promise things to people and then have them get heartbroken because they don't fall into the specific bucket that you fall into. This one says, I was 32 when I became pregnant. It took 2 cycles. My gynecologist told me that I had and still do at 34 plenty of eggs and no cysts. But of course, this is a case-by-case thing. And this is very, very, very much the case. A lot of women, like especially with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome is becoming more and more common these days, and women are getting diagnosed with that earlier. And things like endometriosis is also another illness that impacts fertility. So people have things going on. And so you cannot, you have to really look into your particular situation before you can make any assumptions here. This person says, I think it depends on the person and maybe their lifestyle choices. I'm 40 and very healthy. And my last 2, I got pregnant the same month that I tried. And with my first in my 20s, it was the same thing. Breathe on me without protection. And I'm pregnant. And I like this one because she does say, hey, I'm lucky to be in this position of being able to get pregnant at 40 years old quite quickly. Now, to show you some of the others to contrast, she says, the first one says, I had my first 3 in my 20s. I'm 34 and just had my last baby in July. No problem getting pregnant with the first 3. It took 20 months to get pregnant with our new little man. And 20 months is a long time. Like for a lot of doctors, they'd say if you're struggling to conceive for longer than a year, then you should get checked out for fertility problems in general. Like it's worth doing some testing there to see where your hormones are at. This one says, first pregnancy was at 27. Now I'm 30. Both were the first try. I think the issue is that statistically being more likely to have issues with the pregnancy or the baby the older you get. rather than ability to conceive in general, but I'm not a scientist. Also, if you are more likely to have your own health issues the older you get, and that can impact pregnancy, such as type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, muscle and skeletal issues, and stuff like that, which is rarer or not yet developed in younger people. Now, generally speaking, a lot of women will kind of bounce back from a pregnancy a lot quicker, a lot faster, and a lot easier with the younger they are. So obviously the older you are, the longer it takes for your body to adjust and for your body to recover. And this is kind of true across the board. You know, kids heal very quickly, and then when you're a 30-year-old person, then it takes a bunch longer, and when you're 50, then it takes even longer, and so on. So pregnancy is kind of similar in that sense, that if you're in your 20s, you're likely, for the majority of people again, to recover a bit faster. And then this one says, she had problems with fertility, got pregnant the first month. I lost my virginity at 18, birthed at 19, got pregnant using spermicide at 23, got pregnant after a single try at 26, tried for 5 months at 32 before getting pregnant and having a miscarriage at 6.5 weeks, tried 3 or 4 more months before conceiving again right around my 33rd birthday. And that is relatively typical from like if you for the people who have had experience in their 20s and then in their 30s, that happens. Then that's not an abnormal experience that she had. And the final one, she says, I don't know what to say about my 20s because I got my first at 34 after just a month and a half of trying. The second I got at 36 in my first fertile cycle, but this third at 38 after the 9th cycle. So you can see there also, just like the longer you delay, the more time it takes, generally speaking, for your body. And that is basically what fertility is in the end. Like how difficult is it to get pregnant and to hold on to a pregnancy? The next one, what's your take on friends with benefits? A little backstory on me. So I'm a 24-year-old active duty Navy single mom of a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. My kids are currently with my best friend of 14 years who I trust with my life because I'm getting ready for deployment. My kid's father and I were on and off for 4 years, but it was a very toxic relationship and not good for either of us. And before that, I was in 2 other relationships back to back from 17 years old. I met this guy I work with and we became very close friends very quickly and ultimately decided to be friends with benefits since we're both 24, still young, and want to have fun. I just want to know what's your take on it. Like, would you do it if you met someone that had the same intentions as you and the agreement was very clear? Someone that just wanted to have fun, but who you also enjoy spending time with and hanging out and chilling with. Now, my personal opinion on friends with benefits, again, people can do whatever they want, whatever makes you happy. Ultimately, I'm just here opining in the corner, right? So these are all opinions and you don't need to take them seriously. But if you feel called out, then that's probably a sign that you should feel called out. Generally speaking, I would probably say that this is a terrible life choice. I think you both put the friendship at risk. I think the likelihood of you, I think for the vast majority of people, especially women, it is extremely difficult to separate the experience of sex from an emotional attachment. And the longer you spend having sex with one person, the more likely it is that you will develop that emotional attachment over time. And at 24 years old, with already 2 kids, as a single mom, I would probably say it is not worth wasting your time and your energy. And like this idea of I want to have fun, like sometimes it's okay to try and go for the long-term committed relationship as quickly as possible. And when you're like under this particular circumstance, I'd probably say that your value in the dating marketplace is going down like further and further and further down over time. The older you get, the more difficult it will be. The older your kids get, the more difficult it will be. And the more people that you sleep with, the more difficult it will be. And so maybe, just maybe you're setting yourself up for failure, not only by potentially ruining a relationship with a person that you work with, potentially ruining a friendship, but also putting yourself in the position where you will probably take a bit of emotional damage, and then your long-term prospects in terms of relationship will also go down. Those are the things that I see as risks. In this particular scenario, I wouldn't choose to do it, but I'm not this kind of person, and this isn't a thought that would ever occur to me. Obviously, that's me. Quite a lot of people are like, yeah, go for it. So a couple of the comments here. I think the majority of the time, one of the people will fall in love or it will end badly. If you weren't good friends to begin with, then who cares? And so the point being, that just doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me, to be honest. If you are potentially, like, if you have a decent relationship with someone in terms of just a general, friendship, or if someone's a colleague and you get along and everything is fine, but then it ends badly and suddenly you have to deal with a lot of heartache and just a messy situation. It just does not, like, I don't understand what the appeal is, to be completely honest. Next person says, I had a friends with benefits for a bit. It worked out fine for the most part. I don't think either of us developed romantic feelings, but we definitely had interest and attraction. Obviously, it ended up not working out because I didn't like that he started having multiple partners in addition to me, not out of jealousy, but out of fear for my health. I didn't want to get any STDs. It ended fine. We're still on speaking terms, and I met my now husband through him. Now, this is also obviously not taking into account the risk of STDs, which sounds utterly disgusting to me. That's not something that I would do. And then you have a couple of people here who are like, yeah, we're married now. And then others reply, yeah, same. That's what happened to me too. And then this one says, for me, it's just hard to not develop emotional ties to someone I'm in the bedroom with, regardless of age and place in life. And that kind of really, really summarizes it. I think a lot of women convince themselves that they really can, that just having casual sex is fun and enjoyable and like, why not? And especially, like, obviously it's become more and more common lately. And it's much more common amongst younger people than it is amongst older people, I think, because once you've had that experience in your early 20s, usually by the time you hit, let's say, 27, 28, 30 years old, then you start really looking to settle down with someone. And often at that point, if you're a 30-year-old woman, so she has like a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old and she's 24, that means she's going to have a 6, 7-year-old as a 30-year-old woman, and then you've probably been with another 5, 6, 7, 8, however many guys, then for a lot of people that's a huge turn off. And it makes sense, I guess, to a certain extent, if you think that the short-term experience is really fun, and so this whole idea of like finding yourself and experiencing whatever it is you need to experience to know who you are and what you like. But generally speaking, if you have just a little bit of a longer term view on it, the question is, will you be happy in your late 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s with the decisions that you're making now in your 20s? And I think for the majority of people, that's not the case. And maybe it's bad, like maybe thinking so far ahead is also not a good way to live in general. But I think this idea of living with regret is kind of really sad for a lot of people. And obviously you can't go back in time. You can't change the decisions that you make in the past. So if you're going to do things that you really deeply regret that actually impact you in the future, then that's probably not a good idea. So obviously I'm pretty anti friends with benefits personally, but like I said, everyone can always do whatever they want. Here's another comment that kind of backs up my side here. She says, not for me personally, too many risks. You have the risk of unplanned pregnancy, STDs. If one side does develop feelings and they aren't reciprocated, it very likely could end the friendship or cause an uncomfortable, awkward dynamic. Plus you've got kids in the mix. One of my best friends was in a situation like this. She ended up developing strong feelings for him, which were very one-sided. He used this to string her along for a very long time. It ruined their friendship and kept them both from developing relationships outside of the dysfunctional web. Wasted time and emotionally damaging. It was brutal to watch and caused tension in our friendship as I tired of being the shoulder to cry on. It did nothing to try to reason with her about the situation. She was totally blinded by him. I don't know. Maybe it works for some. I've just never seen it work. And that is the note to end on for this one. So there's definitely lots of risk. And to me, the gain of it seems to be very short-term oriented, very kind of hedonistic, temporary pleasure. It's like the idea of instant gratification. And yeah, okay, maybe that's fun sometimes, maybe that's good sometimes, but if you're putting yourself in that situation, then I would always be just a little bit more careful with it. Our next one is titled Married Woman. Do your husbands help take some of the load off of you? If so, what are some of the things that they help you with? My husband says I complain too much and it drives him nuts. We have 2 children together, 5-year-old and 11-month-old. I try my best not to complain, but it seems like that's the only way I'm able to get him to help. We both work. I run a business from home. We both go half on the bills. I do all the cleaning, cooking, grocery shopping. I help with homework, bathe the kids, put them to bed all by myself, and wake up throughout the night with our 11-month-old. I don't have time for myself. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. When he's home, all he does is sit and watch TV or text. I do ask for help, but he doesn't always do it. This is a really typical dynamic in quite a lot of marriages. At the very least, it comes up really, really, really often on this forum. I think I said on a previous video that the top problems that people have in their marriages all fall into the same buckets, and they're usually either related to this kind of scenario where one partner is not helping out as much as the other, usually the man, and then the rest comes down to things like porn and cheating and so on. So yeah, I struggle. I think for the majority of people, the moment that you end up in a dynamic where one person is really nagging a lot, it gets really hard, because there you immediately change the dynamic from two partners who are doing, who are in it together. You're on the same team, you have the same goals, you're committed to each other. Suddenly your dynamic shifts into one person is like the mother child or the father child, and that's not a dynamic that you can sustain a long-term marriage on. And it seems to happen to women very often. I think because women experience really rapid biological changes the moment that they have babies. And what often happens is that a lot of women will take on quite a lot of the childcare, and it comes naturally to them and so on. And then men, if they're not aware of it, or if they're not committed enough, or for whatever other reasons that might be going on that their wives are not a part of, then the men kind of take a step back and they retreat. Maybe some men feel awkward and uncomfortable dealing with young babies, especially so newborns and so on. So a lot happens that makes this dynamic fall apart. Now, if the husband says that she complains too much and it drives him nuts, and she already says, I try my best not to complain, but it seems like that's the only way I'm able to get him to help, then I would probably say that that's a fundamental problem. Like, you need to completely break that apart. One of the best ways to do that would be to already sit down and try and make a plan and figure out a different way of splitting up household chores. But ultimately, if you really find yourself always going, hey, you should do this, hey, you should do this, hey, haven't you done that yet, then your whole dynamic is kind of not in a good place. And this resentment that she builds up when he's sitting and watching TV or texting whoever, that resentment usually comes from this place of knowing or feeling like you don't get time off, and just being really frustrated because you would also like to sit down and relax. So it's not even that you're annoyed at your husband for doing X, but you're just projecting that annoyance because you don't get the opportunities to do the same thing. And so if that's happening, like the moment that you have this feeling of resentment, then that's a really clear sign from the world that you have a problem that you need to deal with. So I think coming out on a forum like this and just asking, hey, do your husbands help out? And obviously some people will say yes, some people will say no. But fundamentally, the question is, what are your expectations? What are your needs? And how can you have a conversation within your marriage, within your relationship, to try and make sure that those are met on both sides? Some examples here. One person says, my husband and I are 50-50 on all housework since we both work full time. We do most things together. I would be so annoyed if you watched TV while I was doing all the housework and kid work. He's being lazy. You are not his mum. And I think 50-50 works for some people. Honestly, I think why a lot of people suffer is because they have this expectation that it's going to be 50-50, and then they find out that actually in reality it's not. And sometimes it's normal for it to not be 50-50. Sometimes it's a choice that people make that it's not 50-50. But very often what happens is that women feel like it should be 50-50 because they've bought the lie that that's how this works. And men just don't have the same types of needs or urges or desires as the women do when it comes to, like, picking up trash or whatever it is, however you split things up in your house. So I think that that's what happens. It, like I said, works for some people, but for the majority of people, I think you need to actually go into what are the things that he's happy to do and what are the things that she's happy to do, and then what are the things that still need to be done, and then you can figure out who needs to do them. The next one here, he doesn't take the load off me. It's a shared load equally between us. He works and I take care of the baby while he works. While he's home, we both take care of the baby. He helps her with dinner, does the dishes, and plays with her. I do bath and bedtime. It's all just shared. He's not your baby. If my husband acted like that, I would just forget to make him dinner or do his laundry and see how he likes doing all of that work. And then I always really hate it when people come up with these types of statements. If a man were to ever behave in this way, then a lot of women would call that weaponized incompetence. So it's going out of your way to pretend that you can't do something. It's very passive aggressive. It's definitely a way to like spiral a situation out of control. So if you have a problem that is fair enough that you're annoyed by, and then instead of like being an adult and dealing with it like a grown up, which is by sitting down trying to fix the problem, you do these types of things and you try and pick a fight and you're really passive aggressive about it, and that's not good either. This person says it's not my load for him to take off of me. These are his kids too. This is his house too. Every meal that's cooked, every load of laundry done, every time the tires get rotated on the cars, those benefit him as much as me. If my husband never parented his kids, I'd kick him out. Good riddance. And someone replies to this, I never understood the language of helping or babysitting when it comes to the house and children. Like, it's your household and your children. You need to just do it. I do actually like some things about this, although I hate other things about this statement. The part that I appreciate is this idea of, yes, is he taking the load off of you? So he's taking a burden off of you. It kind of implies that looking after the household is 100% your responsibility, when actually you're a team, you should be doing it together. So it's not that there's one individual who's responsible for X, but that both of you are together responsible for that. And so all of this, the terminology that people have where they're like, yeah, I need my husband to babysit my child. Like, your husband is not babysitting. It's called parenting when the dad is doing it, you know, in the same way that it's parenting when the mom is doing it. It's not babysitting. So I think that that's fair enough. The part that I don't like, if my husband never parented his kids, I'd kick him out. I think that people make these statements, again, super lightly, very easily, and that's usually not good. We don't have enough context from OP here to be able to say, yeah, this is a terrible marriage, you should get out. And making that advice and stating it quite so strongly and with so much conviction always gives me the impression that people just don't value their marriages and their relationships as much as they should, especially when they have kids. And this one here says, my husband just does whatever he does, whatever he sees needing to be done, and vice versa. We don't have set chores or anything. If one of us notices laundry, dishes, vacuuming, we just do it. Taking care of our child is pretty much the same way, other than I get up at night with her just because my husband could sleep through a tornado. I don't think I or anyone should have to ask their husband to take care of what's also his home and child. They should just do it. I'm his wife, not his mother. I also don't pay for anything. For some perspective on that aspect, my husband covers all of our major expenses, and I just use my paycheck for whatever extra stuff we want or need, or for savings. Obviously, this isn't the norm, but it's not like we split everything 50-50. While I don't contribute my paycheck as much, we have investment properties that I manage and market to get us that passive income, since my husband works 12-hour days and it's just easier for me to do it. In our marriage, it somehow all evens out in the end, but we're not tit for tat people. At the end of the day, everything we have together, so we work together to maintain it. If one of us is tired or needs help, the other steps up a little more. But we're in tune enough with each other that we don't have to come out and ask for help 24/7. The other just realizes it and help. Now, I think this sounds like the perfect marriage, and when things just magically work out and you don't need to ask the other person, and you don't have the tit for tat aspect, so you understand that just different people contribute differently, and then that's okay with you. You both just contribute to keeping the household running, to your kids, to raising amazing children, and so on. I think all of this is amazing and great. I like the idea of, I don't think I or anyone should have to ask their husband to take care of what's also his home and child, but I think that for the majority of people, you do kind of need to have some understanding of how you're splitting things, just because it doesn't come naturally to people, just because one partner maybe notices different things that are a problem from the other partner. It takes a long time, and in my opinion, quite a bit of negotiation to get to this point before you're able to just have things work out the way that you imagine them to work out without caring too much. Our next one here is titled, Husband Forgot 10-Year Anniversary. My husband forgot our 10-year anniversary, which honestly shouldn't be much of a surprise to me, considering he also forgot my birthday last year. I'm just starting to feel like I'm putting everything into nothing. I haven't posted here in this forum for a while, but I'm at a loss. My friend told me that he's showing narcissistic traits, which breaks my heart. We both had a rough 2022 year with him losing both his dad and nan. I had a very close relationship with both and planned both of their funerals, which wasn't easy, of course. But this has been showing for years prior. I'm sure many don't care about anniversaries or birthdays, but just the thought of him caring about me would be nice. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and he says my gifts are paying for the roof over my head, a car I didn't want to spend money on, and just essentially living. I also have been stressed with being a stay-at-home mom because I want to work. I like being proactive outside of my kids, but apparently I'm not allowed to complain about being home all the time, because that's what a mom does. I wake up stressed and sad because I want a life outside of what I do now. Now, this one is pretty sad on the whole. I'm going to be honest here. I am the person in my marriage who forgets anniversaries. So I probably, my husband is much more likely to remember our anniversary than I am. So yes, I don't think that necessarily has to come from a place of a lack of care. Although, you know, at minimum, what you can always do nowadays is just set up a reminder for yourself that on that day, just like a calendar event that reminds you that morning or the day before that, hey, your anniversary is coming up, so you should do something for it. I think that this part is projection, largely speaking. I think the fundamental problem that OP is experiencing here is just that she's not happy with her life. She's not happy with her life choices. And this is one of the interesting things. I feel like a lot of people will assume that being a stay-at-home mom is something that is quite boring. A lot of people don't really value it and don't appreciate it. A lot of women do still want to be stay-at-home moms despite that. But then it also happens the other way around, where I think some women maybe at some point choose to be stay-at-home moms, and then they feel trapped. They feel like they don't quite get enough, let's say, like mental engagement. They aren't able to use their brains or use their minds, use their hands the way that they got used to when they were working, whatever else they were doing with their time. And there's definitely something draining about spending all of your time with babies or with children, just because they take a lot of focus, they take a lot of energy, and it's a very different, it's like none of it is intellectual energy, largely speaking. Like when they're a bit older, it's different, but generally speaking, interacting with a baby requires zero intellectual effort. It's all about just looking after the baby and making sure their needs are met. And so I think having this switch and experiencing the switch of, okay, you know, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom, but I would really like to do something else as well. I think that is a pretty normal experience to have as a woman and a mother. And to me, what is fundamentally important here is, number one, it seems like the husband is not appreciative enough of the work that she does as a stay-at-home mom, because he says that she should treat the fact that she gets to live in his house, I guess, on his dime, as though it's a gift. And that's obviously not how it works in a marriage, and especially not if one person is a stay-at-home parent. And then the second one is that he does not seem to appreciate that she's not really happy with the choices that they may have made together previously, and she does not want to be a stay-at-home mom, at least not completely anymore. And so both of those imply to me that for whatever reason, they're not taking each other very seriously, or at the very least, he's not taking her very seriously. And I think she's kind of fixating on the slightly more minor things. She's taking them as proof that he doesn't care about her, when actually the proof that he doesn't care about her comes rather in the other things that he's saying, and not in the fact that he forgot about the anniversary, which I know a lot of people would take very personally, but it's honestly not the biggest problem in the world. And so for the others, I think I would try and sit down, have a conversation around it. Obviously, he's probably coming at it. What I hear from the words that she says here, she says, apparently I'm not allowed to complain about being home all the time. It sounds to me like he's probably working a lot, and he, I guess, comes to terms with working a lot because he feels on some level that this, like, he's financing her ability to stay at home, yeah, which is factually true. And so for her to complain that she's staying at home while he's shouldering the burden of providing for her I can see why that would be something that's quite annoying for a man. And so the question is, how can you really sit down and say, look, I really appreciate the work that you're putting into it, and I appreciated the opportunity to stay at home with the kids, but also I need something else to be able to be happy and productive and feel fulfilled in my life, that I'm not just looking after the kids 100% of the time. And even if that's going back for like a part-time role, working 1 day or 2 days in the week, whatever that looks like for you, I think it's fair enough to try and come to a decision together about branching out and trying to find other things to do. And so that's kind of where I would go with this. When it comes to things like the anniversary, birthday is a bit harder to kind of move away from. Anniversary, at the very least, I think that both parties can take the lead for organizing something for the anniversary. And so, for example, she could have decided to do something for their 10th year anniversary. The birthday, I think, is fair enough. Like, you can't decide to do something for your own birthday. So I would probably maybe have a conversation with him about that being quite hurtful and just wanting to do something for your birthday as well in general. But that's kind of how I would approach this. Fundamentally, I think if you come at it from this angle of, how can I change the way that my life looks so that I feel a little bit happier and a little bit more fulfilled? And I would probably try to understand why he has such a hard time with it, especially this attitude of you should be grateful that he, his gifts are paying for the roof over his head, over her head. That really sounds to me like he's a little bit bitter about the work that he does, and he feels unappreciated as a husband. And then I think the question is, why does he feel that way? How much is he working? Is there a different way that you could split the load, and how can you make him feel more appreciated and more respected in the work that he's putting in? You can see some of the comments here. This person says, I'd suggest therapy, and if you can afford daycare, then start job hunting. You shouldn't feel trapped into being a stay-at-home mom. For my husband, he's always said that a roof over our heads is in a decent part of town, a quality vehicle for me and the kids, and anything deemed necessary for day-to-day life are literally the bare minimum for me as a stay-at-home mom. Those things are not gifts and shouldn't be treated as such. My birthday's in a couple of weeks, and I suggested to my husband he could get me some new kitchen towels I'd been eyeing as a present. His response, yeah, go ahead and order those, but I want to get you something else that's just for you. And so people do give her this example of like how it works in other marriages that are in a better place, which I think is fundamentally helpful, actually, because sometimes you do need that reality check. And if you are caught up in this environment where one partner really believes that having a roof over your head is like not a bare necessity, kind of like the bare minimum expectation, like there's no point in you providing if we don't have shelter, like it's that important, in the same way that there's no point in you providing if we don't have food. Like those are the two fundamental things, and utilities, of course, like electricity. So if you're covering those things and you're just covering the bare essentials for life, and it's only the things beyond that really matter. But that would be, I don't know to what extent it's helpful to have people say like, look how amazing my husband is with regards to giving me a gift. That's probably not that nice. Next one says, sometimes when I feel like no one is taking care of me, I take care of myself. Also, if you want to work, then work. Not everyone wants to be a stay-at-home parent, and they shouldn't have to be. Look into daycare options, or a family could help out. Even just look for a part-time job. I'd be furious if my partner told me a roof over my head was a gift. I agree with the previous poster that therapy may be the way to go. I don't tend to suggest therapy unless it seems like people are incapable of talking to each other. And maybe that is the case here, and that's why they're such on wildly different ends of the spectrum. But I really like the sentiment. If I feel like no one is taking care of me, I take care of myself, because I do think you should treat yourself like someone who deserves help, the way that you would treat an external person that you actually care about. And I think that makes a giant difference to your life. And it also makes you feel a little bit less like you're reliant on the other person to fix everything for you all the time. If you think, okay, I'm not happy with where I'm at right now, what can I do to fix it? And then try and get your husband on board with that. And this one says, this isn't about your anniversary. This is about being married to a terrible human being. Get a job. You're probably going to need it. I have 5-year-old twins and was a stay-at-home mom for 4 years from when they were born. If my husband had ever dared insinuate that he was doing me some kind of favor by working 8 hours a day while I stayed home, took care of 2 babies and the house, I would have given him a very loud piece of my mind. You deserve better. Now, you see, people tend to jump to this conclusion that he's a terrible human being, what a terrible husband. Obviously, they read the same line that I read and took it kind of at face value. And I understand why. I think that if you end up in this type of arrangement where one person is a stay-at-home parent and then the other person kind of lords it over them and holds it over their head as if they're doing such a huge sacrifice by working while the other person stays at home because they're just sitting about at home doing nothing all day, then that's already like your dynamic in your marriage is not in a good place. So I understand why people assume that. I often think that this comes from a place of people not feeling appreciated for the work that they put in. And if I had to probably pinpoint like one of the biggest things that seem to happen in terms of how men and women interact with each other in a marriage, then it's this lack of appreciation. And honestly, it's really, really hard to hit a point where people do feel appreciated, because it's always a question of like, how do you express that you appreciate the efforts that someone is going through? And just saying, hey, thanks for doing that, it's great. But you can't thank someone for working every day when they come home from work, right? Like that it doesn't work that way. So I would encourage OP to try and find a solution in terms of a way to talk to her husband that makes him feel appreciated while still trying to change her situation in terms of being a stay-at-home parent if this is not something that she is happy with. I wonder if the stress that she feels about being a stay-at-home parent, though, is also caused by the husband's attitude towards it. Like if it's something that's being held over your head, then you kind of have this knee-jerk response to go, oh, well, I could work too, you know, like you're not saving me from anything. And that's probably, this seems a little bit passive-aggressive to me as well. But fundamentally, if you are unhappy about where you're at in your marriage, then that means that there are some things that should be changing. And I think being a stay-at-home parent is a huge honor and a privilege for a lot of people, and something that a lot of people would really like the opportunity to do. But there's no shame in saying that's not working for me anymore and it needs to change. That's all we have time for today. If you like the video, feel free to like it down below or leave a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I said today, feel free to also subscribe for future episodes, and I will see you in the next one.